Okay, so yesterday we learned, first we finished off from last parak, and we learned about the halacha of Rab Tarfon. In the Mishnah, we learned about halacha of Rab Tarfon that holds that Nazir should only be a flaw, and we learned about a shita of Rab Yehuda, who held that a person does not enter himself into a suffix. And we learned that although Beisila holds that Naziris and Hektish Betos is not a Naziris, but Naziris and Hektish, that's suffix, is Naziris and is Hektish. Then we started a new parak. Good morning, Mutti. Then we started a new parak that tells us finally about what is the halacha of a Nazir. What does a Nazir have to do? And as I was preparing shir yesterday, my son decided that he wanted to listen to Stefanski's interview of that Nazir. It was quite an interesting interview. He claims that his life got so much better since he became a Nazir, the closest to the Ribui Shalom. But I guess if you can modify or massage the definition of better, then yes, his life became much better. He said he got certain clarity. He said he got closer to the Ribui Shalom. He wrote Svarim since then, and so Stefanski asked him, so the clarity and the kedusha that you got from the Naziris, if it led to you writing many Svarim, he said that his wife is in the Nazir with him. They did this together, and he asked him, "Did your wife write Svarim?" So the Nazir said no. Then he asked, "What would be if you would be shoyl on your nether, and the Chacham would be oiked the nether l'mafreya? Would those forms suddenly get wiped out? Like, how would that work?" So those are interesting shadows that he asked. Okay, so we learned about the halacha of the Nazir. He has to refrain from becoming tamei. He has to refrain from cutting his hair, and he has to refrain from yoytzim min hayayin. And we were going through the rules of yoytzim. Oh, thank you so much, Mary. We were going through the rules of yoytzim min hayayin, exactly what is it you can eat. And the Gemara, the Mishnah brought different shitas. Rabbi Akiva held even if you just soaked your bread in wine and altogether combined the bread and the wine with a kazayis, that would be enough to be violating the Naziris. Then we learned that on each component, the Tanakam holds on each component of the grape, you could be over, while Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah said you have to have two chetzanim and a zag in order to violate with seeds or with the skin of the grape. You have to have two chetzanim and a zag, which we understand as meaning two seeds and one peel. But there was a Tana who held that it's the opposite. The zag is the peel, and those who the zag is the seeds, and the charton is the peel. Well, we learn that the zag is the shell, and we remember it because the outside of the bell is called a zug. Then the Gemara wanted to know this machlokes that we have. If Mechatzan Vat Zag is telling you a special chiddush that you have to have both, it's not just telling you that either one of those would be also, you have to have both. That machlokes, where does it come from? So the Gemara ended up quoting the pasuk that's a Prat, Klal Uprat. Miyayin v'shecher yazir, chaymitchayin v'chaymit shecher lo yishta, and then it says Chalmishus anovim lo yishta, anovim lachem uleveshim lo yochel. This is a pasuk that's chock full of pratim. The next pasuk says Koil you in Israel mikoil asher yasem megefen hayayin. Once again, that is a cloud. The question is, Mechatan Vat Zag, is that part of this sequence? And it's a prat, Klal Uprat, or is it an independent pasuk, not related? So Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah is going to learn that this Mechatan and Vat Zag is not part of this sequence. It's a whole new statement from the pasuk that's telling us that you have to have a Chatan and Zag. While the Rabbanan learn that we darshan this with a Prat Klalu Prat. So that again, the Rabbanan say we darshan this with a Prat Klalu Prat, and it's all one sequence. And Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah learns that you learn it with Meut Ribui, and this pasuk of Mechatan is an independent is an independent agent. Now the Gemara is going to go through and analyze and drill down in the Brisa that discussed this processing of the pasuk. So we're on the first wide line of Daf Lamed Daled Amud Beis. Omar Mar, Maha Prat Mefurish, Pri Upesailas Pri, just like the Prat is a Pri and it's a Psailas Pri. And once again, we said that the Pri is a Novim and the Psailas Pri was Chaymetz. Afkol, so too, whatever we're going to learn, in addition to what's stated specifically in the list of Pratim, also have to be in these two categories, Afkol Pri and Psailas Pri. So what is the Pri that's not mentioned Mefurish in the pasuk that we're also adding to the list of forbidden items to the Nazir? Mahi, Zaktamar Guharki. Guharki is boiser, it's an unripened grape, as the Tosfos tells us a little bit later down. And the Chiddush is that even though it's an unripened grape, it's still considered a Pri that's usher to the Nazir. And I've called the Psailas Pri Mahi. The Psailas Pri is Choy Mitzadovim. It's vinegar. What is the extra that we're learning because of the Klal? Rav Kahana Losuya Inve Dichrin. And this is referring to Zok Duran Anovim Shesliu, Anovim that became wormy. Now, of course, it's not only a Nazir who's not allowed to eat wormy grapes, it's every person is not allowed to eat wormy grapes. So, of course, it must be referring to grapes that were wormy, but now no longer have worms. Highly, highly appetizing. I'm sorry? No, that's not a joke. It's not a you mamish asked a gewaltige shaila. You asked a gewaltige shaila. Duvi's asking, maybe it means if you need a magnifying glass to see it. So of course, we're going to show soon that if you need a magnifying glass to see something, it's not a problem. And Boidik is all those bugs you can see with the naked eye if you look very carefully. The magnifying glass makes it easier. I don't know the answer, but that's why I answered the Psak Halachos. So believe it or not, you think this bugs. There was a fellow, the fellow who raised awareness to the entire problem of finding insects in insects was a Yid Rabbi Bodner in Lakewood, and I remember we used to call him Bugs Bodner, as in Bugs Meany. Remember Bugs Meany from Encyclopedia Brown? So we called him Bugs Bodner. That's what we used to call him. And but this shaila of bugs came up in the 1700s. There's a story in the 1700s where the scientists of those days discovered that vinegar has in it microscopic parasites, bugs, and there was a whole movement that vinegar should be also. So the chachamim of their time, Akubi was the Chayei, they brought a raya that of course you're allowed to eat chaymetz, because the pasuk says chaymetz is also to a Nazir. Vice the chaymetz must be mutter to everybody else, and therefore whatever microscopic beings are floating around in your vinegar, those clearly aren't a problem. Why? Because they're not visible to the naked eye. So I guess even though we use microscopes to find these bugs, I guess it has to be that if you really look carefully, you might be able to see it. No? Listen, if Bodek would advertise, we only take out the bugs that you can see without a microscope, nobody would buy them. Okay, gewaltig. Zog the Gemara. There's a little bit of a shaila what the Gemara is focusing on. And Tosfos then says the thing that we're focused on is the word va'ad. Va'ad zag. Omer Ravina lesuye de bein habein. It's coming to include the pulp of the grape that's between the seeds and the shell, which is a very severe thing to say, because that is the grape. Isn't that what grape is? So Tosfos has a couple of pshatim in Bein Habeinim. So let's just quickly peek into Tosfos on Daf Lamed Hey Amud Aleph. once again, typical Nazir form. The I'm trying to come up with a theory why in Nazir all of the Toshushim are not on the dot that they're written on, and I chapped why, because the printer was drunk, and he knew he should have become a Nazir, and then he would have been sober, and then he would have typeset it much better. That's just my first version, my first attempt at explaining it. Hopefully, there'll be other more reasonable answers. Zog to Gemara. Zog to the Bein Abeinim. The Hainu Guf Ha'anav. The Hachi Mashma Lishna Dekra, and that's actually what the pasuk is saying. Mechartzanim Vadzog, from the core of the grape until the skin of the grape. Pirish Masha Bein Chatzan Lazog is also usher to be consumed by an usher. The kosher fake toises. The Hey Guf Ha'anav. Isn't that precisely what the grape is? Ukvar Kosav Anavim, and the Torah already says Anavim. So Toises backs away from this most positive shot and suggests something else. Sometimes there are smaller grapes that get clouded out and overwhelmed and eclipsed by the bigger grapes around them. And since they'll never be able to access sunlight, they will never grow fully and ripen. They'll never be fully matured. So that's like boiser, basically, a non-matured grape. So for Ektoisvis, in Toimer V'Maitrich Be'adla Ben Abinayim, V'alek Far Mabinim Afilu Boiser Micheina Prat. Didn't we already include boiser? Zog Toisvis, this is worse than boiser. V'Shemi Yesh Loimar, the Hani Nami, the Hani Grimi Boiser. These are worse than boiser. Boiser will eventually fully ripen and grow to their full size. Boiser will never ever get there. So not boiser. This Bein Abeinim will never get there. So you need a special pasuk to say that these are also usher to a nazir. That's teretz number one. Teretz number two, you need two psukim, one for boiser and one for Bein Abeinim. You know why? The lav ba'ad, if you didn't have the extra pasuk, well then marbin Bein Abeinayim. For Bein Abeinayim, you marbin mecheina prat Bein Abeinayim v'le boiser. Then maybe you would have only learned Bein Abeinayim and not boiser. So you need two to tell us both. And now Tosfos wants to rehabilitate the first pshat that it means the pulp. Tosfos asks, how can it mean the pulp? Isn't that what a novim is? What happens if you peel the grape and you took out its seeds? Do you know anybody who eats grapes that way? It's not a normal way to eat grapes. And the chiddush is, and he's not eating it the normal way, and maybe that wouldn't be usher with his ears, kamash shalom, that it's usher. Just from anavim, you would know if he eats a grape normally, like a normal person. But eating it shaloika derech achila, that's what this pasuk is telling you. Okay, so now we've extracted from here that boiser is usher, Bein Abeinayim is usher, and Chasadim and Zagam are usher. The shaila that we've had, that we're having machlokes about, is if the leaves and the soft stems, if they're also included in the Isser. And we learned, if you learn Prat, Klal, Prat, they won't be considered in the Isser because it's not so inclusive. But if you learn it as Meut Veriba, if you learn it as Meut Veriba, which we said Nazir did, then of course even the shoots, which are the soft stems, and the leaves are also going to be awesome. Okay, so let's see the Gemara right there. Amar ma prat mafurish prigomer av kol prigomer. That was in the brisa that we quoted. The Gemara asked, just like the prat is a prigomer, av kol prigomer, and therefore it should exclude boiser, is how the Tosfos learned. The Gemara challenged this prat, klal, prat, and asked that maybe it should exclude boiser. You have to say that we're including boiser, because if you're excluding boiser, then there's nothing. Normally, a prat klal uprat, it's telling us don't stick exclusively to the items in the list. Being that there's a klal there, open it up a bit, and find other items that are similar, that share similarities to the prat, and include that in the Isser. If you're not going to add anything because of this klal and stick only to the mefurish list that are listed in the pratim, then I don't need a klal at all, because I'm not opening it up to anything other than those items specifically listed. So therefore, actually, this is the Lashon HaBraisa. What exactly do we see from the klal shaloi amru that weren't stated mufurish in the pasuk? Anovim lacham yiveshim, if you want to suggest that it even includes anovim yiveshim, haksivi, that's mufurish in the pasuk. Yain v'chaymitz, wine and even vinegar, again haksivi. So therefore, ha'ein alecha ladun koloshin achrain ala koloshin rishon. We shouldn't follow your suggestion that you need a pre-gomer to exclude Beiser. Rather, we're going to stick to what we said, that we need to add Beiser to the list of items that's prohibited for a Nazir to eat. Because if not, then there's really no purpose for the klal. The Gemara, the rabbi is called over. So since at the end of the day we're almost including everything, what is the purpose? We have the Prat, we have the Klal, and we're pretty much included everything. So what do you see from the second Prat, according to the Chomim, where it says Chartanim Vazag? What do you learn from there? Dr. Gemara, Loimer Loch, that teaches you Kol Mokrim Shat Meut Prat uKlal, Yater Shoy LeMoishoy LeDoinoi Ke'ein HaPrat. You if you have a prat and then a klal and then nothing else, then you don't only include things that are kein prat. Rather, you know how you would darshan that. Elanasa klal moisif ala prat. You would say that the klal opens it up completely. Achi yifreit lo hakosov, until the pasuk tells you once again with the second prat to tone things down and to limit and to discriminate against everything and only pick a specific set of items. Kederech shaparat lach b'Nazir, just like you see the Torah did by Nazir mechartana v'adzag. So mechartana v'adzag, its function is not minei ubei in Naziris. Rather, I mean, it is ultimately, but at the first glance, it's not minei ubei in Naziris. It's to tell us that you only limit the list of items to items that are compared to the pratim only if there's a prat following the klal as well. Not only is there a prat preceding the klal, but there's also a prat after the klal. That's the main purpose of these words, to teach us that that's how it works by Nazir, and that's how we would darshan whenever we would find a prat klalu prat. Gewaltig. Ula Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, remember, did not learn our sugya with the Prat Klalu Prat track. Rather, he darshan it with the Meut Ribui, and the second set of the Chartanim Vadzag was its own thing, telling us that you have to eat both. So the Rebbe Elazar ben Azariah did come line Chartanim Vadzag loimer sheina chayiv at sheyochel beis Chartanim Vadzag prata minale. What do you need the prat for? So there's a shaila what this means. So the shaila is, if he doesn't darshan prat kalalu prat, so why does he need a prat for? He doesn't have a prat. So why is this relevant to Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah? So some Rishonim learned that the shaila is, does Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah in other places subscribe to the limit of prat kalalu prat or not? He's exclusively a Ribui or Meut. And any time he runs into such a sequence, he will only darshan with Ribui or Meut and not with Prat, Klal, or Prat. Or maybe some places in the Torah he does darshan it, and for some reason here he decided not to. That's how some people learn the shaila. But Tosfos learns the shaila is, it's a given that Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah subscribes to the rule of Prat, Klal, or Prat. And sometimes Klal, Prat, and Klal. V'haraya, there are many cases throughout Shas where the Gemara makes a darshan, a drasha, with a klal prat or klal, and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah doesn't seem to protest it. For instance, we know that, actually, I don't have to say that for instance, because the Gemara is going to throw out soon a couple of for instances. So we do know that Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah in certain places in the Torah does subscribe to it. So if he does subscribe to it, so then the question is, Prat Minale, where is he going to learn that you have to have the second Prat? Dr. Gemara, Sabar Lak Rabbi Eliezer, the Darish, Meut Veriba. Oh, I'm sorry. I made a terrible mistake in how I'm explaining the Gemara. I was jumping ahead 10 lines. I didn't even realize that I wasn't at that stage in the Gemara yet. So the Gemara is asking Nazir, who is using Bechartan Vadzag to tell you his exclusive limud. So how does he have the final prat? Because at this point, the Gemara still thinks that Rabbi Eliezer ben Nazir doesn't necessarily agree to Rabbi Eliezer earlier, who dashens a Ribui and Meut. At this point, we don't see a direct connection, even though Tosfos in the Mishnah told us about that connection. But Tosfos got it from this Gemara. So according to Rabbi Eliezer ben Nazir, that you're using Mechartan and Vadzak for something special, you can't use it for the Prat Klalu Prat that the Rabbanon uses to learn this whole sugya. So how does he know the rules of what applies to Nazirs? So he'll have to hold like Rabbi Eliezer, like we introduced on Amud Beis, the Dorish Meut Veriba. So therefore, he doesn't need the last prat because he's not using the last prat at all. It's a Meut Veriba, and therefore he'll have to hold that the leaves and the stems of the vine are also going to be usher for a Nazir to eat.
We back up for a sec. Are you suggesting over here that it's okay not to believe in this method of darshaning kal pratu klal? Are there people that don't hold of it?
That's what the Gemara is probing here. That it's possible that Rabbi Eliezer, his approach, l'chol ha'Torah kula, when he sees such a sequence of klalim and pratim, is he dashens it with Ribui and Meut, which generally opens it up a little wider. Klal prat and klal is normally more restricted.
I thought this was like chiseled in stone, that you can that this is one of the
exactly what you're saying is what Tosfos says. It's chiseled in stone. Everybody agrees. It must be that the question here is this local issue. Rabbi Eliezer decided to use Meut Veriba, but he must subscribe all over Shas because it is in stone. Wherever you go in Shas, you find the drushes of Klal Prat to Klal. So that's what the long Tosfos. Maybe we'll skim through the Tosfos a little bit.
Okay.
So Zak Ribui say Mikarabanan. Yeah, Klal Prat Klal. And the one example is right over here. If you learn Klal Prat to Klal or Prat Klal Prat, then all you're going to be marba is boiser and grapes that are wormy, but you won't add the stems. Oh, that's why you use that pen today. That's what would be usr. That's exactly what usr. He has his mamash the leaf and the stem. That's exactly what that's Rabbi Eliezer's pen. You have Rabbi Eliezer's pen. Gewaltig. I have to show the oilam Chaim's pen. The oilam should see what I'm talking about. Here's the Chaim's pen. It's mamish the boiser. It's mamish the alim and the lovin that Rabbi Eliezer was talking about. Or maybe Rabbi Eliezer ben Nazir, who holds that the sexual limud, also holds that there's a prat klal or prat going on over here. Oh, I'm sorry. Could be even maybe maybe even our Gemara who holds Chatanim will also hold like the Rabbanan. He saw that in fact shoots and leaves are not included in this. He saw that Kedam Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah lichte ve'rachmana lahai mechatanim v'adzag gabe prati l'may hilchos akosvei boser klal shemami no l'medayne b'chlal uprat. Just to know the halacha of the fact that you have to have chatanim and zag, you have to eat both to be over. You just need to say chatanim and zag. But where those words need to be placed in the pasuk is not necessarily at the end. It could have been placed with the original list of pratim in the first cases of in the first item in the first list. Yet the Torah decided to separate it from the first list and put it after the klal to teach us that we also have the klal of prat. In fact, now that you're agreeing and you're subscribing to the fact that it is a prat klalu prat, and the Torah strategically placed Mechatan and Vadzag after the Klal. So maybe that's all the Torah is trying to tell you. How can you also extract from there this additional information that in order to be over with Chatanim or Zagim, you have to eat both? So tomorrow, because in Cain, Lichtov Oishnei Chatanim, Oishnei Zagim, Oichatzim V'Zag. If the whole purpose of Chatanim V'Zag is just to have a set of pratim after the Klal, then the Torah could have picked a much more generic type of prat, like Chatanim, Zagim, one Chartan, one Zag. But the Torah was very specific. 2 Chartanim and 1 Zag. That's unusual. That's to teach us an additional halacha. So you have the Klal Prat because it's situated after the Klal, and the economy because of how the Torah expressed the Prat. Zok the Gemara of Rabbi Eliezer the Darish Meut V'Riba. This is what I was referring to earlier that I mixed up. So till now we were focusing on Rabbi Eliezer and Nazir, what his position is. Now we're going to come to focus on Rabbi Eliezer, who said beferish that he's using the Meut V'Riba, and that's why it's more inclusive, and it includes even the lulavim va'alim. Rabbi Eliezer Darish Meut V'Riba Prat u'chlal u'prat minalei. How do you know b'chala Torah kula that you need a second prat after the klal in order to limit the items included in the list to things that are similar to the prat? How do you know that? So here's what Tosfos asks. What do you mean? How do you know that? Who said it's true? Who said Rabbi Eliezer agrees to that? Maybe you hold that you never a darshan prat klal prat. You always approach it with a Ribui Meut approach. And that David's asking, what do you mean? Isn't it set in stone? And in fact, Tosfos says it is very much set in stone. So it's a long Tosfos. I'm just going to skim a little bit. So it's just before the very first wide line, Tosfos asks him, maybe he completely rejects the entire concept of the klal prat to klal approach. Maybe it's a universal approach all across the Torah if you use the Ribui Meut method or the klal prat to klal method. So Tosfos is from the reading as himself. It's the Cain. This is really what Rav David Zolti said. The Cain havaloi lachleit b'chol makom shanu darshan b'chlal prat to klal. All over the Shas we find klal prat to klal, and you don't find that the Gemara interjects with Rabbi Eliezer's opinion that he argues. So we're going to see soon. Which is Davar Shemetaltal B'Guf. We'll see that in the Gemara. So Zok Tosfos, it's a muchach that Rabbi Eliezer surely holds of this approach of klal prat to klal. And therefore, how do you know that you need to have the prat at the end or the klal at the end, depending on what approach you take? So Tosfos has 2 mahalchim. Tosfos has 1 mahalach that he subscribes to all of these things, except in certain cases. And Tosfos has another pshat where he doesn't hold of klal prat to klal at all, and he doesn't hold of prat to klal, and he doesn't hold of klal prat. There he uses the Ribui Meut method, but the prat klal uprat that he for sure agrees to, and he holds that when you have a prat klal uprat, it's exactly the same or very similar to the same way we normally darshan a klal prat to klal. So we normally have a prat surrounded by 2 klolim, and there we say that we're only marba prat. Rabbi Eliezer agrees that if you have a klal that's surrounded by 2 pratim, you'll also darshan it the same way. So we know for sure, even if he argues on everything, when it comes to klalu prat klal, he definitely agrees that we do darshan prat uklal uprat. So binole, where would he get it from?
Every time has to be a klal prat klal or prat klal prat.
That's a very good kasha. That's a very good kasha that you're bringing up, because part of what Tosfos says, it's a long Tosfos, I can't go through it now, but part of what Tosfos brings up is sometimes when Rabbi Eliezer encounters a klal prat klal, he'll just cut off the last klal, just like he did over here, and he said this is a bezin de dach, and it's only a prat klal or klal prat, and we'll dash and Ribui Meut. That's exactly how Rabbi Eliezer operates. So Tosfos gives us a bigger insight into the exact mechanics of when Rabbi Eliezer applies this method versus that method. But we definitely know that Rabbi Eliezer for sure agrees, at least sometimes, we darshan Prat, Klal, Prat, and then we need to know, how do you know, where does Rabbi Eliezer know that you always need the second Prat to make it work? He's going to learn it from the following pasuk. This is the pasuk that talks about the halachas of someone giving something to a shomer. So it says as follows: ish el re'eu chamor oishar oiseh prat. That's a prat. It's listing off individual type of behemoths. V'chol behema. Then the Torah says any behema. That's a klal. And then it says lishmar chazor uparat. So I'm scratching my head. How is lishmar a prat? So Rashi, the Mefarish, tells us, you know how it's a prat? Because it means it can't be a bear or a chaya, because these are things you don't normally give to someone to watch. You're going to give an animal to watch. And I'll just point to it in the Mefarish, Yotsu doivim varoyos, lions, bears and lions, the lav b'nei shmir ninu, she'ein lam tarbus, they're never tamed or domesticated. So lishmar chazor prat. So even Rabbi Eliezer agrees that we darshan prat uklalu prat, iyatadon elakaina prat, which is exactly how we b'chol haTorah kula darshan maklal prat uklal. And what do you learn from the keina prat? What do we learn from the keina prat? So Tosfos speaks out. What you learn from the keina prat is right. In the Rabban use it for klal prat klal over there, but he learns it. He's marba from here. He's marba from here. Let's see what he's marba from here. That's why he starts with the prat. So the Rabbanan learn that there's a klal first, but the Rabbanan holds it's not a klal first. The chol is klal, behem elish mechad the prat. The Rabbanan darshilei the perkazov the klal prat the klal. The Rabbanan used the klal prat the klal method, but Rabbi Eliezer is going to use the prat klal prat method. Behem b'kol duchli the ashkon drosha klal prat the klal the loy polag Rabbi Eliezer. Any time in Shas where you find a klal prat to klal, where Rabbi Eliezer doesn't argue, you know why he doesn't argue? Hainim shem the dorish labor prat uchlalu prat, and he rearranges the words. He finds that he gets rid of the original klal, and he says it's not really connected, and he finds another prat at the end. So I think you learn from here. It has to be davar hamatalto. The gufay moment, I think, is what you learn from here. Lafuke karka or lafuke ashtar. Okay. So Dr. Gemara, the Rava Amar Napke Le Mahaikra. So it doesn't have the halachas. It doesn't have the halachas of shvur shaymin. If it doesn't have the halachas of shvur shaymin, if he swears, I think that's what it's referring to. So it wouldn't apply to a pikadon of karka or a pikadon of shtar, because it's not a karka is not movable. And ishtar is not gufay moment. It's not. It itself doesn't have intrinsic value. That's right. So Zok to Gemara, where you learn from Ve'im, and this is a pasuk by Karbonis. Now I should really quote the Lashon pasuk inside because we have it right here. It says Ve'im minatzoin karbanai minaksavim oy minaizim la'ila zachar tamim yaktivenu. So it's referring to what animals can be brought as karbanos. So ve'im, I'm sorry. Right, so the Gemara is going to itemize. Ve'im min means from. From by definition means not all of it. So that's a prat. Hatsoin is klal, it's including all time. And then the pasuk goes back and says ksavim ve'izim is chazav b'prat. So prat uklalu prat iyatadon elak prat. The only darshan is ke'ena prat. What do we exclude from there? So I believe Tosfos here brings down. Tosfos discusses it can't be right for every but Tosfos ended up saying it's to be meut a shor habor, a wild type of animal. The kach near them in a prat mashma. Oh, sorry, lemait shtei shonim. if the animal is too old. The stam kevis mashma ben shana or stamez mashma ben shnasa. Okay, so it's referring to it's being mamayit. It's being mamayit an animal it's older. I'm sorry. Well, a kevish normally means that, but since there's a klal there, it broadens it. That's the purpose of the klal. Well, I guess the klal is saying that even if it's in the second year, it's still kosher to be brought as a korban. Okay, so the Gemara weiter. Amalei Rabbi Yehuda midiskarta. Yehuda from diskarta told Rava the leiluf and hadenkra. Why don't you suggest another pasuk that also discusses what would seem to be a prat klal prat? It says min is prat, habehema klal, bakavitzayin chazar parat. Another pasuk that's related to Rabbanis. Prat the klal prat, yata don elakena prat. And this is where Tosha says to include a shor, a wild shor. Amarlei min hai lekala mashmanina. That's not a good example of a prat klalu prat. Why? The ime hasam havamina habehema. Let's think about it. It says habehema, but when it says habehema, it also means a chaya. The ime hasam havamina habehema chaya bechlal behema. Normally, the normal understanding is the word behema is a very inclusive term. It even includes chaya. So when it says mina behema, you have a set of animals. The set of animals is behemoths and chayas. Min ha-behema is a prat. Some animals from the group of chayas and behemoths. So you wouldn't be able to learn from this klal prat or klal that chayas are not included, because the word behemoth itself includes the category of chaya. Amar lei. So he answered back, chay b'chlal behema. In this case, you would never say that a chaya is included in the word behema, because here the context shows that it only means a behema mamish and not a chaya. Haksiv bakar v'tzoin. At the end of the last part, it says bakar v'tzoin, which clearly shows that we're not referring to chayas at all, and therefore v'havale prat uklalu prat v'yata don elakena prat. So Rabbi Midiskarta said that this is a very fine example of a prat klalu prat, and we're including ashar habar, I believe, and therefore don't argue with my example of a prat klalu prat. It's a very good example. I'm going to see. I think it means excluding, but I think it means including. But that's why I wasn't sure. So I wanted to see inside. Hariyat dan kind of prat ma prat and forest lemute chayim mikarbon. But can't be. The Marif, the Hani Klal, the Ribui Shar Habar, the Behemohu. Afagav the Rogel ben Achayis, Bavak en Chaya. So an ox that grew up in the wild, that would be mutter to be brought as a carbon. So that's what it's a cow that grows up amongst chayis. Maybe that is a buffalo. That I don't know. Okay. Okay. So let's see the Gemara weiter. Why do you start with Vayikra by the Chemishida, not by Reishis? Then what? I always wondered why by Chemishida they all start from Vayikra. But I don't listen good enough. I didn't listen good enough. So that's why they start from Vayikra. Oh, very nice. Okay, Gavalti. So now what we've illustrated is that even Rabbi Eliezer, who in our sugya uses Ribui Meut, but all over Shas, when he runs into a Klal Pratu Klal, he also agrees to darshan it, although he switches it to a Prat Klalu Prat, and he darshans it the same way as the Rabbanan darshan the Klal Pratu Klal. Zok the Gemara, we know on the Hachihu, and now Tosha tells us what is the Gemara Shaila. When we know the Hachihu, we're switching gears. we've now departed, we've satisfied our understanding of Rabbi Eliezer. Now we're going back to the Rabbanan. Our Rabbanan Kai, Dar Shilil, Klal, Prat, Klal, Umar B'Keina Prat. Right? That's what the Rabbanan do. They darshan normally a Klal, Prat, Klal, and they're Mar B'Keina Prat. And the question here is the Kaboy Min Nalon, the Midizu B'Torah. How do you know B'Chalal this rule that you can darshan a Klal, Prat, Klal? And the Gemara is going to go through all these drushes and where we know from to make these drushes. The Kaboy Min Nalon, the Midizu B'Torah, Hainu L'Midrash Keina Prat. How do you know that you do? That's how you approach a Klal, Prat, Klal. The Tanya, it says in the pasuk, it says in the Brisa, that it says in the pasuk, I assume this is speaking about Ma'aser Sheni. Klal, that's the Klal. Babakar ubatzoin b'yayin u'b'sheichar. Those are clearly pratim, prat. U'b'chol asher t'sholchan avshecha chazav v'kolov. Klal u'prat u'klal iyatadon ela ke'ena prat. Anything that you're allowed to buy have to be similar to the prat. Ma prat mufurish pri mi pri. It's something that grows from something else. It's something that's procreated from its parents and the gidule karka, and it grows from the ground. Afkol pri mi pri ugidule karka. The only thing that you're allowed to buy with Ma'aser Sheni are pri mi pri and gidule karka. Now Tosfos makes it very clear to us. Af ma prat mefurish bakar b'tzoin. Bakar b'tzoin is pri, right? It's born. It's born because it's conceived by its parents. The behemoth misabra zumi zubi always, and animals are also called gedule karka. You know why? Shen gedelim in the aretz me'esav aretz, because they eat grass. So they're considered to be grown from the ground because they eat grass. Afkol, what is it being marba lasuye oifos? It's to be marba oifos can also be purchased with this money, but ulam ute dogim, but you wouldn't be allowed to buy fish with this money, mayim, water, umelech, and salt. So that's if you use the klal prat klal method, because it's very restrictive, as we said, it's not so inclusive. It excludes dogim, it excludes mayim, and it excludes melech. Ulu Rebbe Lazar, because it doesn't grow from the ground. Ulu Rebbe Lazar, the Dorish like Beriba, Meut for Riba, Marbinian Afilu Dogim. If it's Ribui, Meut, and Ribui, it's even Dogim, Meut, Elamayim, Umelech. That only includes, he only is Mamayim, Umelech. So if you hold a Rebbe Lazar, you can buy fish for your Shabbos with your Ma'aser Sheni, but according to the Chama, you cannot. But Tosfos doesn't say that. Shchita, yeah. But then oif is. Yeah. I'm sorry. Well, a lot of say whales, for instance, eat plankton, which is plant growth, but I guess that grows in the water. So tomorrow, michti, klal uprat uklal kein prata dainina. If the normal way that we assess a klal prat klal is keina prat, well then klal abras mayahani. I have a klal, tells you to open it wide. I have a prat that tells you to limit it. The compromise is things that are kein prat. So what do I need the last klal for? Tomorrow, ahani la sufe called the dummy. I need it to add things that are similar to the prat. Why is that? Zokt the Tosfos. Agav Gerara also lafrishi tam hamidos b'chilukeinu mishpatim. Why does klal prat klal work this way? So the Gemara presents it in a sort of akasha and teretz form. Ahani la sufe called the dummy the prata. The loiksiv klal. If you didn't have the last klal, have a klalu prat, and then the halacha is vein b'chlal elamashe b'prat. Whenever the Torah says a klal and then a prat's the final word. In order that the prat shouldn't be the final word, the Torah had to throw in an extra klal. Zok to Gemara, v'su prat uklalu prat. We have this rule of prat klalu prat as well. Ke'ena prat aninon. Once again, prata basra mayahani. Why do I need the last prat? I have the first prat. I have the klal. I know to make a compromise. Once again, because you prata basra have a meaning that's a klal moshav ala prat. I would have said that the klal is the final word, and therefore there is no restriction. Zok Gemara, umichti. Train klali uprati, utrain prati uchlala. We have a rule, klal, prat, klal. When one prat is surrounded by two klalim, you darshan kaina prat. We also just discussed this rule that when one klal is surrounded by two pratim, you also do kaina prat. So what is the difference? Train klali uprat, utrain prati uchlala. Kain prat daninan. You darshan them both the same way. Ma'ika beini ubeini. What's the difference? So tomorrow I'll tell you the difference. Ika the ilu tartan klali uprata. If there's two klalim surrounding a prat, which definitely has a connotation to be more inclusive. Ika prata the domile afilu b'chat tzad. If you find something with even one similarity, marbinon, you could include that. But if there's trei prati uklala, if you have two pratim that surround the klal, there, in order for it to be included, it has to be more similar to the prat. Ika prata the dami mishnei tzadin marbinon, but the chatzad loy marbinon. Zoktimor michti prat uchlal. How do you dash prat uchlal? The approach is nasa klal moitzav ala prat this rabbi kol milei. That's how prat uchlal works. Umid for riba nami riba akol this rabbi kol milei. So we're making such a big deal of how you darshan. At the end of the day, it works out to the same thing. Ma'ika be'mid for riba leprat uchlal. So Gemara precisely our sugya ika the leprat uchlal marbinin afilu alam v'lovin. If you were dashing with prat uchlal, that would be even more inclusive than amid for riba. It would even include alam v'lovin. Umid for riba v'lovin in alan loy. So Tosfos asked, what do you mean mid for riba v'lovin in alan loy? Didn't we just say a minute ago that Rabbi Eliezer darshans mid for riba and he includes alan v'lovin? That's how the whole sugya started. So Tosfos, the lulavim that we're talking about here are hardwood ones, which we said earlier, everybody holds that's not going to be part of the prohibition. But if you were dashing with the prat klal, which opens it up completely, there even the hard wooden stems of the vine would be awesome. Okay, we'll stop here and we'll be mamshach tomorrow. There's so much in this sugya that's beneath the surface to extract the meaning of how it works, mamash klal, prat klal, and that Tosfos discusses in detail, but we only have the limited time that we have. But this is mamish, to me, this is mamish like getting a look at the machine language of a computer program. We just see the interface, how everything stims, but someone had to write the program behind the scenes to make everything work. Our whole shas, we're used to using klapper to klal, how do you apply, when do you apply? So Tosfos goes through this in pretty detail. No, Ribui Meut Ribui is more open than Klal Pratu Klal, but Pratu Klal is more open than Meut and Ribui. So there's a lot of moving pieces here, and that's what this long Tosfos here is about, showing you why is it more open? Why is Pratu Klal more open than Ribui Meut? So Tosfos says the swara is a Pratu Klal. Klal is the general thing that applies to everything, so it's wide open. But Ribui Meut, it's a Ribui, it's a Meut. It's only referring to one detail. So in Maila, the Ribui Meut is not so open.